Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. I thought I would make another, once again, moral philosophy video. And this video in particular is sort of branching off on the other video that I previously made about deontology and consequentialism. Well, not so much, but there is a thing that I criticized with deontology that, sprung about this video, which I thought would be necessary to include. So basically, on the topic of moral subjectivism, I wanted to include and say that I guess the question that's been lingering on my mind is basically, where do morals actually come from? Because I don't believe they come from an objective sort of foundation, because as I've said, I am a moral anti-realist, so I don't believe that moral properties actually exist anywhere. But obviously, we live in a world where we act as though we have morals, we have moral values, principles, whatever, all that kind of stuff. So I thought it would be necessary to make a video on moral subjectivism, ethical subjectivism, because I've argued a lot at some point that, oh, morality at best is subjective. I made a video about moral nihilism a while back. I didn't actually watch that before making this video, but I know at one point I actually did say in that video that yes, morals are subjective at best. But I get that it is kind of a contradiction to say that morals can be subjective, but also kind of argue that there is no such thing as morality to begin with, because, a lot of, arguments against moral foundations are basically, morality isn't even real, especially if you consider moral nihilism and error theory. Yes, there are, things that I can agree with about that morality does not inherently exist whatsoever. But I do think, at the very least, what compels us to behave in a way as if we have morals is basically from a subjective, you know, lens. And I will defend moral subjectivism in this video, or I will give it more credit than the moral realists do, because moral realists believe in some sort of like objective foundation. And I don't believe that's true at all, obviously. So, first of all, I think I should just get it out of the way that I think a lot of people, or maybe people that are just initially entering into the discussion about moral philosophy, they might strawman moral subjectivism a lot, because a lot of people will say things like, oh, if morality is subjective, that means that everything is permissible. Well, actually, no, it's not, because that's not the same case. And even if morality is subjective, no, it does not mean that everything is permissible. You make so many decisions every single day that are subjective, even what you prefer to wear, even what you prefer to, eat. What you might choose to eat says something about your taste preference, your flavor palette that you prefer, or what you decide to wear might say something about, your subjective sense of style and fashion or whatever. So I don't understand why people have a lot of cognitive dissonance when it comes to saying that morality is subjective, because even if we believe that killing somebody is not objectively wrong, let's say it's subjectively wrong, it's not like we're unable to run the world that way, even if it is under the subjective impression of it, because kind of like what I said, you make subjective decisions every single day, and it makes no impact towards, not being able to make those subjective decisions. So when it comes to morality, it should be no different. And I'll provide another example, even further. Obviously, moral subjectivism, ethical subjectivism cannot be about everything being morally permissible, because, for example, I'll just make up like a, random example here. If somebody wanted to shoot a baby in the face, it's not going to be possible that they can shoot the baby as they please, and someone else is going to get their way in terms of saying that they're not allowed to shoot the baby. The only thing that can happen is either they will be able to shoot the baby in the face if they have the power to do so, or they will be prevented from shooting the baby in the face, in which case they will not have the power to do so. It doesn't eliminate that either of those stances are still subjective. Wanting to shoot a baby in the face is subjective, not wanting to shoot a baby in the face is also subjective. So if you're gonna, go ahead and attack moral and ethical subjectivism, avoid this straw man because I'm smart enough to see that, yeah, that's exactly what it is. You know, a straw man. So I'll go about a whole bunch of like other things as well. Oh yeah, the reason why I'm saying that we might go about as if our morals are objective, despite the fact that, they are subjective, I'll draw it as a parallel to like a lot of things because a lot of people will say, for example, that like, oh, a lot of the subjective decisions that we make every single day, it can't be compared to something like morality, like I don't know, your sense of style or your taste preference when it comes to food. I know there might be somebody, listening to me and, is already going to be like, no, you can't compare like, our ethics, our morality to something that's, subjective and not a problem. And I'm like, why not, honestly? Because I'm still going to argue that we very much still do treat subjectivity as if it is objective. Because think about this. Think about any reward show. Think about any beauty pageant. A lot of these things are very much still grounded in subjectivity, especially when we say, let's say, like beauty pageants. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? But I don't know, if there's like a famous model or like a famous like beauty pageant contestant and somebody were to be like, oh, she's not that attractive or something like that, there's going to be somebody that's like, yeah, well, she won a beauty pageant, or oh, she's a model on a whole bunch of like billboards. They're treating it as if it is objective, that these credentials and these qualifications make about, disproving something that is still fundamentally, subjective. Whether or not you think somebody is good looking or not, it's all subjective. And it's no different with morality basically. So there is a there is very much a blurry line between what is actually subjective and objective. Well, actually, no. I mean, I'm saying that just to like, like, I guess like fiddle, I guess like, like put in the confusion that a lot of people might have about this, but a lot of this is still ultimately subjective. And another thing that I wanted to touch on about like, believing that morality is subjective at best or that ethics are subjective at best is okay. I, you know, I was thinking about something like in the past few days before I made this video, and I thought that I should really include it here, is basically, I guess, yes, like the question that I have to ask though is that if morals are not at best subjective, how can you claim that they're actually yours? Because think about this. If you are a non-religious person, you might come across a specific, like, like religious person. Yeah, I'm not going to generalize so hard because I know that not all of you believe that, oh, just because you're an atheist, it means you're I don't know, like you don't have morals or you can't like behave in a society. Even if I'm still gonna call that like subjective. Like, yeah, I know not all of you believe that, let's say, a non-religious person is, you know, automatically like, let's say, like a threat to the moral foundation automatically, let's say. But there are a lot of you, and I will be addressing you when as I say what I'm about to say, might ask questions like, okay, if there's no God, if there's no like deontological, like inherent, like structure for morality, then how can you claim what you think is right or wrong, like definitively? And I will say, no, you cannot definitively say what is right or wrong. You can only say definitively what is right and wrong for you. But this is actually quite the irony because depending on the kind of like religious person you are, maybe even the deontological person that you are, because okay, this is why my last video about like deontology prompted me to make, this point that I'm about to make about like moral subjectivism is because, okay, honestly, if morality does come from any sort of like objective foundation, you cannot call that your morality. So technically, I would argue that if you believe there are objective moral foundations to something and you can actually claim something as objectively right or wrong, you're just a follower of that objective system. They cannot be your morals, so to speak. Because if there is an objective right or wrong to something, then personal subjectivity doesn't matter, right? So it's actually kind of ironic if like moral realists, people that are religious or deontologists or like whatever, come at, consequentialists, moral anti-realists or like what moral skeptics basically. Let's just say moral skeptics and say that like, oh, you have no morality. But in a way, if we believe in subjective morality at best, that is the only way you can have personal morality because it doesn't matter if you believe in an inherent model for morality, like yes, like for example, there's like an objective foundation. If you believe that, kind of like what I'm saying, then it has nothing to do with you. You kind of just have to, abide by it because it's, objective. So your subjectivity doesn't matter. So even if you say, okay, my subjectivity still aligns with like the objectivity, that doesn't matter though, because for example, if you take something simplistically objective, like 2 + 2 = 4, that has to be definitive in an objective way. It doesn't matter if you subjectively think it's two. It's two independent of, what you think, right? Because, for example, that's how a lot of us would define an objective, the qualitative state of something being objective. It exists outside of the self. So I'm actually going to say, just to get a lot of people thinking, especially if you're a moral realist and whatnot, personally, it seems as though even though there's no like objective moral foundation, I would honestly think the more that I think about it, like as a moral anti-realist, only we are the ones that can have personal morality. Because okay, if you're gonna say that we have no morality because it doesn't, fall under like any system, again, you're a follower of what you believe is objective morality. They are not technically your morals because what you think does not matter towards them. Me as a moral anti-realist who's saying that my, belief in morals is at best subjective. I'm projecting it. I will fully admit that I have no objective grounding to say why what I think is wrong is objectively wrong. But if it doesn't, uphold or adhere to any sort of like objective, foundation of something, then it only comes from myself. Therefore, it is only my own personal morality, my own subjective morality, and what belongs to you more than your own subjectivity? It would be your subjectivity, not anything that's filled with objectivity in this case. So basically, the only reason I think we can exist in a world where we can, yes, project morals is because we have this subjective morality, even if people do not want to, like, address it. And okay, and to be fair, if you have subjective morality, I would say you have no basis to justify it other than yourself. So that because that's just again your subjective morality. That's just your own personal interpretation of how ethics and morality ought to go. So I think this kind of fuels in my belief that like yes, everybody is actually just selfish at their core. You can't have selflessness despite the fact that a lot of people might want to treat a lot of more realists might want to treat morality as if like it's for the greater good or some sort of like selfless like sort of thing. No, I think that everybody is still selfish and that's why within morality, you have your subjective morality just because everybody is selfish. And I even saw a meme. It's the meme with the guy who's checking out another girl and his actual girlfriend is looking at him with disgust. And it's kind of funny because moral subjectivism is, regarded as like a moral interpretation that kind of rests in between the moral anti-realist and moral like realist position because yes if you believe that morals are subjective they have no foundation but if you believe in moral subjectivity you can say that morals exist simply just because they are subjective and projected. So I don't know if this solves the normative like the normative ethical problem that like I've been having, but at the very least I'm just going to say that I think the only reason you can do anything is because morals are subjective and because something is subjective there is no objective basis for it. It exists simply just for you. It is selfish. It has no justification. It doesn't need a justification. That is the whole nature of something being subjective to begin with. It's basically yeah it's basically circular when you think of how subjective it is, it kind of just falls under the whole like, oh, because I said so, nothing more, nothing less. So yeah, morals are not real. Subjective morality allows us to project. Because we can project morality, we shall act as if our morals are something, even though they aren't. So yeah, that's basically my piece on subjective ethical Morality, yeah.